Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Sarah, and I work with the Living Archives Project, where we are collecting stories on how various communities were impacted by COVID in Charlotte, Mecklenburg County. Today is October 17th. Wow, such a great day.
Yes.
And fall is upon us, which is awesome.
Fall.
And I'm here with Jazmeen. Would you introduce yourself?
Hello. My name is Jazmeen. I am currently wearing, I believe it's a yellow greenish headband.
Okay.
I have on a black and white striped flannel kind of thing, and black tights and brown Uggs.
Awesome.
Ready for the fall.
Ready for the fall. I love it.
Yes.
I love it. Jazmeen, would you mind sharing a little bit about who you are? Like, what brought you to Charlotte?
Okay, so I came to Charlotte in, I want to say officially August 2023. So, no, August 22, sorry.
Okay.
So August 2022, sorry, and I came here because my husband was already here, and we were recently married in June of 2022, and I received a job opportunity right after the wedding, and he already had a running business here in Charlotte. We did like long distance for a little bit, and he was already settled as far as employment here in Charlotte, and then I got a job opportunity, and we just packed up and moved right after the wedding.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you're very new to Charlotte.
I'm very new to Charlotte.
How has that transition been for you?
Still learning the ins and the outs. I think I just figured out what East Charlotte was.
Okay.
East Charlotte, West Charlotte, all the things. So I am getting a little more acclimated to it. It's been a little bit, but yeah, I'm becoming used to it.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I guess, what is one thing that you see is similar about New Jersey and Charlotte?
Something similar. So I am from Jersey City, New Jersey, which is right across the river of Manhattan. So I'm like right there. So I could consider myself a semi-New Yorker, because we developed a lot of their tendencies because we're so close, literally 15 minutes away from Lower Manhattan. And something I find similar could be the city life, in a sense. It is slower now. Like, people aren't as rushing in Charlotte. But if I do happen to be downtown Charlotte, it does give me a little bit sense of home because of the semi-high-rise buildings. Or I see the bus or the trolley, and that kind of reminds me that I am in the city just a little bit. Not home, but definitely a little city vibe.
Little taste.
Just a little taste.
Like a little nibble.
Yeah.
I love it. Well, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
So you said you got married to your husband. So that's pretty recent.
Very recent.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
Is he from Charlotte or North Carolina?
So he's from Orangeburg, South Carolina, born there. Then he was raised a little bit in Holly Hill, South Carolina, where his dad is from. His mom is from Vance, South Carolina.
Okay.
So, and he also has, his mom's dad is from Jersey.
Oh, cool.
So he
That's
has family in Jersey, but he was like halfway. He always likes to call himself like a hybrid kind of kid, because he was up and down from North Carolina, South Carolina to New Jersey. So he went back and forth. His mom moved a lot back and forth. Yeah. So a lot of times she lived in the surrounding cities of Jersey City. And they also lived in North Carolina. So he's like a fake kind of military kid, I call him.
Yeah.
So he's been in like 10 different schools in his like childhood alone.
That's a lot.
Very pick up and go. His mom is very like I don't know. Maybe I don't know what happened really, but she was just, trying to find her happy medium. So we actually met in Jersey on the summer of 2010. He actually had just got out of school and he wanted to go visit his grandfather, sorry. And his mom wouldn't let him because she wanted him to start college right after. And he said he wanted a break. So in the middle of the night, he called his grandfather and let him know that he got a ticket, like a Greyhound bus ticket to come see him, and he was going to be there without his mom knowing. So he basically ran away to avoid going to college because his mom was making him. So then he ended up in Jersey the whole summer, and then that's how we connected through mutual friends.
Cool.
Yeah.
So you've known each other for quite a bit.
Yeah, we've known each other since the summer of 2010, on and off.
Yeah.
Because he moved, he was living in Charlotte at the time while I was in Jersey.
Yeah.
And then after I graduated high school, I moved to California. And he then moved to Jersey City, but I was in California.
Okay.
And then when I moved back to Jersey City after the year in California, he moved back
oh my gosh.
to North Carolina. So it was a back and forth type of thing.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And then 2016, we were at the same place, same time. And then that's when we really took a chance on our relationship.
Cool.
Yeah.
And now you're married and you're here.
Married. Yeah.
And how awesome is that?
Right.
I mean, I bet every season of transition has its ups and downs.
Yes, absolutely.
But it's nice to have you here, and we're very thankful for your willingness to share your story with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah. So before we started our recorded interview, we did an activity together called a hand map. Mm-hmm. Is there anything, Jazmeen, from your hand map that you want to share with us today?
I could share a little bit of my journey of losing my grandmother.
Okay.
I feel like COVID-19 had a huge impact on that. Mm. Although she didn't pass away from COVID, but in the months leading up to COVID, she began to get a little sick and a little weak. Mm. And she really just didn't take care of herself after her husband died.
Yeah.
And, me and my brother tried our best. She lived right around the corner from us, which was, accessible and great. But she hid a lot of her sickness from us in the months or years leading up to COVID. So we couldn't really see any of the things that she may have been going through because she hid it. And then she had to have surgery on her leg to add a stent of circulation. And then that happened. She knew she had to have the surgery right before COVID. And then COVID hit. And then she still had the surgery. But then after the surgery, they have to put you in rehab because now she has to figure out the stent situation and learn how to walk and all those things with it because she needed a rehab. But at the time of COVID, because it was so new and no one really knew what was going on, they put her in a rehab facility. And we weren't able to visit her at this rehab facility. So she didn't get any better. Mm. Because when she got to the rehab facility, they made her isolate because of COVID, just in case she came from the hospital and she brought COVID into this facility. So they isolate her for 2 weeks. And apparently there's a nurse that's supposed to be checking on you throughout those 2 weeks to kind of make sure you're okay. But we couldn't confirm any of that because we couldn't go inside there was no visitors or anything like that.
Man.
So we can only talk to her on the phone and kind of pray that everything was going to be okay. And it wasn't. So she continuously got sick to the point where she couldn't walk anymore. And my aunt then moved her in with her to kind of figure out what was going on.
Yeah.
To see if, we can get things under control. And she couldn't walk. And things just started to go downhill really fast. Mm-hmm. And then she lost circulation in her leg to the point where they had to amputate her toe.
Oh, goodness.
So she goes back into the hospital to have that particular surgery. And before, that stent was fine. The stent was great. The surgery went perfect. Even though she smoked most of her life, that surgery was actually very successful as per the doctor. And if she would have just been able to really do physical therapy, she would have been back to herself in no time. But because of the isolation and her not being able to move or no one really helping her out the bed in the sense of that 2 weeks to make sure that she doesn't give COVID to the facility, that it really just set her back to the point where they had to amputate her toe because there was no circulation anymore. So we went back and forth with that. She went back into a nursing home at the time. But again, another 2-week isolation because they don't want, just in case she came from the hospital or came back home, they were going to give COVID to the other people in the facility. They isolated her again. And then this is just where my grandmother just stopped talking. I really think she fell into a very deep depression to the point where she just lost the drive to live. So sorry, I know. So she literally slowly died for about a year because of all the isolation. We couldn't see her. We couldn't talk to her. All because of this COVID-19 virus. We just couldn't go into the facility. And then she turned 70 that September 16th is her birthday. And she turned 70 and we were supposed to they were going to wheel her out so we can talk to her outside of the facility. And we get there and they say they can't wheel her out. Mm-hmm. And I'm trying not to get emotional at this part because this is so we literally had to celebrate her birthday while we watched her in the window. She turned 70. And we had to give her gifts to, I'm sorry.
Take a minute.
We had to give her gifts to a nurse and watch her celebrate through a window that we couldn't touch her. And when I think of that, and even though she eventually passed away January 2022, January 16th, actually, 2022, and her birthday was September 16th, 2021, when she turned 70, she didn't pass away from COVID. She passed away from bed sores. She passed away from the drive to live. And all of the things that she passed away from, to me, were avoidable. So to kind of have to sit with that, it was the most heartbreaking thing because you go into the hospital thinking that you are going to have surgery for one thing and then end up having to just not be taken care of the whole time in and out of the hospital. And it just kind of sucked at that time because we couldn't do anything. Yeah. It was a virus that we couldn't stop, a virus that we couldn't make them change laws for or mandates or anything like that to to make it feel better. So she didn't have visitors the whole time she was in and out the hospital. The most we saw her was when she was in the hospital, but by the time that happened, she had given up.
Yeah.
She had given up. Like we literally saw her fight just deplete. Like every time. So she just stopped talking.
So sorry.
So yeah, when I think about COVID, I think about the loss of my grandmother a lot, because it really took a toll on how we could have. And I am spiritual, right? So I know a lot of things may happen for a reason. Mm-hmm. But this particular situation, I feel like deep, deep in my heart could have been avoidable.
Yeah.
But because we had those mandates and we had those rules, that we just couldn't really get in there to see if she was being taken care of or not.
Yeah.
And that's the part that I'm still grieving to this day. And I don't know how to let that one go.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, first, I'm so sorry for your loss. I can't imagine how hard that is.
Yeah.
And it's in a situation like the one that you face, you and your family, not being able to physically be there or support her, losing that control of, like, that is really hard.
Yeah, literally just kind of watched her.
Yeah.
It was, and I think for me, and it sounds crazy, right? Because having someone die suddenly is still devastating, right? Mm-hmm. But then to kind of sit and watch someone die, I feel like and it sounds wild, but I feel like I would have rathered a sudden death than to literally watch her just turn into someone I couldn't recognize.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now that you've had some time to grieve and process, is there anything that's helped you through it? Is there anything that you've learned from it?
So, right after her death, I actually got a new car. And then months later, I actually got a new apartment. Okay. So it was almost like things started to happen. And I would make a joke, and I'm just like, oh, my Nana's up there just partnering with God and making all these blessings happen for me. So I think my faith helped me, but also me getting my own apartment at the time of grief, at the time of new grief, was just so needed, because it gave me time to be by myself a lot. And not necessarily isolate to the point where it was damaging, but isolate enough to really feel.
Yeah. Because
I made myself very busy.
Yeah.
Like, at the time of her, slowly passing away, I was at the hospital every day. I was at my aunt's house every day. I was making sure she had everything she needed. I was buying random stuff to try to make her feel better. I was stretching myself so thin, I thought like helping my aunt make certain decisions was going to help her. And it was almost like I was just trying to save her. And I had this like saving mentality where I was just like breathing, eat, breathe, sleep.
Kind of going through my emotions.
Yeah, just trying to make sure I do everything in my power to let her know that I'm here. And I think when she finally passed away, I actually took my first breath. And when I got my first apartment, it was my first apartment by myself. And I started to breathe. So I took my first breath when she passed away, but I actually started to breathe in the apartment that I feel she worked with God with to get me. And it gave me a lot of time to talk to God. It gave me a lot of time to journal. It gave me a lot of time to do therapy. I was in therapy at the time. And planning a whole wedding. So
Wow.
grieving, healing, planning a wedding.
Wow.
All at the same time. And it was a lot. And it just really, truly showed the strength of a person and how you can be strong.
Yeah.
And yeah, at my weakest points, I felt the strongest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So doing that, having your own space, having that ability to just breathe and process and grieve and plan and everything that you did,
Mm-hmm.
how did that feel? How did that make you?
I felt crazy most days because I was still a social worker. I was still dealing with my clients who may have lost their family members to COVID.
Yeah.
Or, you know, them being terrified that they have COVID. And I'm working from home at the time because I was an essential worker, I guess, in a sense at that time. But all of our meetings were via Zoom.
Yeah.
So just dealing with all of that, I felt very crazy. And I am then talking about my feelings with my therapist and going through all the feelings and then trying to be a strong social worker for my clients. So I'm not really sure how I got through all of that, but the strength of God.
Yeah.
And my prayer life was very strong.
Yeah.
I prayed a lot. I took moments a lot, like to the point where I would sit in silence for hours.
Yeah.
Just to process, just to feel. Because if you don't feel what you're going through, you won't really be able to grieve it.
Yeah.
So I took a lot of time to feel. I think I cried the most that year. Like, I cried a lot that year.
Yeah.
And just healed. And it was just all about me. That season was literally just although I was planning a wedding, and although I was a social worker, and although I was grieving, it was all about me. For the first time, I felt connected to myself. Yeah.
Did you learn anything about yourself in that process?
I did, actually. I learned that I'm a really cool person.
I love that.
I'm really cool, and I struggled with identity a lot as a second child because it was always like my brother, and I'm always like his little sister, and it's always like I want to do what my brother's doing. And I think I kind of lost myself in that process growing up, and also just trying to identify. Because then I also was like, all right, I know I'm Black, I know I'm African American, right? But we don't have a flag to celebrate, or we don't have like a place where most of my friends were going back to. I had a lot of Hispanic friends growing up. So they had flags and they had homes to visit. And I just always felt disconnected from that. So I always tried to reach for something to connect to instead of really just honing in on myself and trying to figure out who I am and my own culture. Because I did have a culture, but I didn't recognize I had a culture until I started to find myself that year.
Yeah.
And then I started to really just become connected to myself and learn what I liked and not learn what like other people liked and me trying to be like that, you know?
Yeah.
So in that year, I really just learned to love myself and be myself no matter what.
I love that.
Yeah. A long time coming, but it happened.
So good. Was there something that you learned that really surprised you?
That surprised me? I want to say, I think it just surprised the fact that I really just did not know who I was.
Yeah.
I'm like, I really spent a lot of my early 20s not living a life that was mine. It was like living a life for others.
Yeah.
And not pleasing for me. It was me pleasing others.
Yeah.
I had this like very terrible people pleasing complex where it was just like,
Yeah.
I felt guilty if I made anyone feel any type of way. It was all about people and how I could help people and how I can uplift people and how I could, but it was never how I could uplift myself or how I can, like, it was definitely a freedom moment for me. Definitely freedom.
That's so great.
Yeah.
And so now, as you reflect back on that season, how are you feeling?
I feel great because I think if I didn't have that moment, I wouldn't be able to be a wife that I am today. Okay. Even though I'm early into my wifehood, I feel like if I didn't find who I was, I don't think I could have been a successful wife. Or I would have been able to say I do at the altar. Yeah. Like Love is Blind or something. because I just needed to make sure that I was able to identify when I'm losing myself in a marriage.
Yeah.
But I think that's what happens a lot in marriages where people just stay in a marriage and they stay content because they don't know what else to do. Or they can't really find themselves. They get lost in the children, lost in pleasing their husbands, or lost in their jobs. I think it was very important for me to find myself prior to marriage so I can identify those triggers and know, like, when I'm going off the deep end, like, okay, maybe I need to sit in silence for a little bit. Maybe I need to take a little trip, or maybe I need to just go to a hotel for a night. Or like, when I find myself, I think it makes me very self-aware. I became very self-aware with just sitting with myself a lot that year. So I reflect and I'm happy that it happened, but sad that it happened the way it happened. Yeah.
Yeah.
Unfortunate, not sad. It's unfortunate the way it happened. Let me correct that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I'm not sad, but yeah.
How did you feel through all of that? How did you feel connected to your family? How did that look like?
So, at the time of this huge transition of life, I was living with my godparents, and we all grew very close throughout the pandemic, like closer than we were prior to it. And we also lost, like my godparents lost their parents as well during COVID.
Wow.
So my godmom lost her mom, and my goddad lost his dad. And that was a lot because I was living in the home at the time. Yeah. And the grandfather was actually living there with us as well. So I was kind of his caretaker in a sense because he had Alzheimer's. And he went to the hospital for a backache, and he did not come back home. And then my godmother's mother, who I consider my these are my grandparents at this point because we're so close. Yeah. And then my godmother's mother developed breast cancer during the pandemic. Yeah. And she got COVID, and it just took her out. She was 80 years old. And my godfather's father, he was 79. So it just took out a full generation of grandparents. And when I think about that, it's almost like the younger generation was now forced to kind of step up a little bit because now we don't have our elders as much as we did. Yeah. And we depended on our elders for a lot of things. So it kind of made us in this like space of like, we have to step up and make sure we're doing what we can do for the family. Yeah. But I think I lost your question because I went that way. But I feel like I was living with my godparents at the time, and all that loss was transpiring and all that grief was transpiring. And then when I told them I was moving out, it wasn't received well.
Wow.
It was not received well. I did not know how to handle it. I did not know how to manage it because, again, in my people pleasing ways, I wanted to please them. But I know that I needed to take this step out on faith and just get this apartment and not worry about what others are thinking. And that was the first step of my liberation, because I wasn't gonna do it, and I was very nervous to tell them, and it was just a mess, and it was emotions everywhere. I feel like my godparents and our relationship still hasn't really truly healed in that moment because of the way things kind of transpired. I feel like everyone had a different perspective on how I was doing it, or it felt like I was slighting them, or it felt like I was not, then I felt like I couldn't be 100% truthful at the time because I didn't want to hurt their feelings, and I'm protecting their feelings. And it was just, you would think people are happy that someone's moving out, right?
Yeah.
So they can get more space, but it was more like, why are you leaving us?
Yeah.
It was viewed as you're leaving me.
Yeah.
And not viewed as, wow, you're taking this step on faith and I'm proud of you.
Yeah.
I don't think I received the I'm proud of you moment from them. And their opinions meant so much to me. But my mom was very supportive. She was like, just go for it. My husband was supportive. Well, then he was my fiance. So I had others rooting for me, but I think their opinions really, really hurt me during that time. So that was a lot to process too.
Yeah.
So now I'm grieving that. I'm grieving my grandmother. I'm still grieving my godparents' parents.
Yeah.
Because I've had deep relationships with them. So when I tell you I lost people back to back to back to back, and also just losing relationships that I thought were solid.
Yeah.
Not losing them, but hurting them, I guess, in a sense. It was just a lot of grief, because grief can be all things. Grieving your old life, grieving past relationships, grieving not just loss, but it was just a lot of grief in order to get me to where I am today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
I know.
Wow. It's a lot.
It is a lot.
On top of that, you're a social worker.
On top of that, I'm a full-time social worker, still social working.
And so for those that don't understand what that may look like, can you kind of briefly share what was your role as a social worker at the time?
So I was in case management at the time. And I had about a caseload of 23. And at that time, I was working with children between the ages of 3 and 21. And we provided, and we were Medicaid, so we worked through Medicaid. So the insurance paid for our services.
Okay.
And I had a caseload of 20, 21, I think I said 23. It fluctuated.
Okay.
So I had a caseload of that. And what we did was we went into the home of children who had behavioral issues, who needed additional help with mental health, who needed some support if they were a DD population, which is our developmentally disabled. And what we did is we act as a facilitator of all of these services that we could provide.
Yeah.
So say, for instance, if a child is recommended for our program, they will come in, we will do an assessment, figure out what their needs, what their strengths are, a plan, basically an individual service plan in order to serve them. And we will then make these connections with we have partnerships. So we would call our partnerships and ask, hey, I have this child who is dealing with some behavior issues, some behavior challenges in this particular place, and we need a behavior assistant who can help us. Or, hey, I'm dealing with someone who is suicidal, and I'm dealing with a 16-year-old girl who's suicidal and has suicidal ideation behaviors, and she's cutting and all these things. Do you have a therapist who can come in and work with this child? So that's what we did. And then we will facilitate these child and family team meetings every 90 days to make sure everyone's still on track, make sure services are still in place. So there's some children who may have needed 10 hours of services every week. And that included a host of things like helping people with ADLs. If they felt like, they were so depressed, you'll find somebody there, or helping someone who just needs to talk through stuff. And these are children, so they had a complex of issues, especially with a lot of bullying in school and childhood and mothers and all of that. And we worked a lot with, we call DCP&P is what down here calls DSS, so the Child and Family Services. So, we dealt with a lot of that.
Yeah.
So we will meet monthly, and we will check in with our families twice a week.
Okay.
So the twice a week will be phone calls, and our monthly meetings will be via Zoom at the time of COVID. And one meeting, so every other month will be our child and family team meeting. But then those 2 months prior to that meeting, it's just me and the family. So although they have these services in place, it's still going through all the motions. It's still hearing their stories. It's still hearing what they're going through. It's still encouraging them. It's still providing additional resources in addition to what we've already provided. Yeah. So it's all of these things trying to make life a little bit easier for them. Yeah. And trying to, and most of the time, I'll be honest, I was a listening ear because I was probably the only one in their life at that time who could listen and who kind of was not biased, because I didn't technically know them, but I knew them. Yeah. So it was making these huge connections, and it's families I've had since I had started the job. So we had became family at that point. Yeah. Inviting to dinners and stuff like that, even though I can't, as a social worker, we cannot do that. But it was so close to the point where they entrusted me and they confided in me, and I did all of that in the midst of my own. Wow. In the midst of my own. So it was tough, but somehow, some way, I didn't allow it to interfere with the love I had for the families I served.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
At that time with COVID, did you feel like the work that you were doing was impacted in any way?
Absolutely, 1,000%. Because let's be honest, a 5-year-old who is on the spectrum is not going to benefit from services via Zoom. Yeah. At all. Yeah. So, although our suicidal ideation children were most likely, from my caseload, most likely to be doing their best because they didn't have to interact with children every day. Like those who struggled with going to school and who were bullied or who had social anxiety and things like that, they were thriving. But our small ones who had, certain disabilities, they were not thriving. They were very much delayed, even, and their behaviors were all over the place, which then made us have to provide more services for their parents more than them. Yeah. Because they're dealing with all of this behavior and they can't get it under control because no one is coming into the home. Yeah. So then when things started to kind of get a little bit better in a sense and they lifted some of the mandates, even though some of our service providers, some of them, said yes to still going into the homes with their mask, and the vaccination was a thing and everyone was making sure they were vaccinated so they can still do their jobs. Some of them were okay with going into the homes, but then there were some service providers that's like, we're just Zoom. Yeah. And we're not budging on that. So then we lost a lot of partnerships, which then was scarce on services we could provide for these families. So it took some times, whereas on average, it only took maybe 4 weeks to get services in place and make sure we have a plan, to it now taking like 3 to 6 months for really families to even get services. Wow, that's crazy. Yeah, so it was very impacted to where our meetings were not really, I guess in a sense, even successful, because we're just talking about updates, but I haven't been able to provide you with anything for you to even tell me what's going on. You're just telling me the continued behaviors. If he had a good week this week or a bad week this week, or it's just been bad altogether. It was more so that. So work became extremely hard, and I found myself apologizing more to families during COVID than I've ever apologized for, because it was out of my control. I couldn't control it. So navigating that job through COVID was, can imagine, not fun. Mm-hmm. Not fun, to the point where families weren't even trying to meet with me. So then I wasn't even meeting my quota. So now I'm looking crazy as far as metrics. And they're like, what's going on? And I'm just like, my families aren't meeting because we aren't providing anything. Yeah. So that's how my social work life was during that time. Yeah. Yeah. Well, Jazmeen, thank you so much for sharing. Yeah, thank you for asking. Out of, want to respect your time and honor you, I'm just going to follow up with one last question. Okay. Is there anything else that you want to share? An experience, a story, anything that comes to mind? I will share this before we go. Right before COVID, that January, before March changed everyone's lives, me and my family went to Mexico. And I feel like we were on the last cruise that the world ever took before COVID happened. And it was just so interesting because although we went on that cruise in January, when March came, we all looked at each other and were like, do you think we had COVID after the ship? Do you think we started this because we got off the ship and just... Because it was this whole big thing of cruises carrying COVID. And they isolated a whole cruise ship where people were living on there for weeks. And I'm like, did we make it out on time? Were we the family who did this? And it was just so funny to kind of think about. We laugh about it now, but at the time we were like, were we really on the last cruise that happened? And it was insane to even think about, but that was the last trip we had for a long time. So yeah, that's one thing that really comes to mind when COVID, because we enjoyed our lives right before COVID. Yeah. And then boom, life changed. Yeah. So yeah. Oh, well, since then, have you guys been able to just reconnect as a family? Yeah, we recently went to Jamaica. Oh, fun. May. Yeah. That's so great. I turned 30 and my godmother turned 60. So. Oh, so fun. Yeah. Well, Jazmeen, thank you again for sharing your story with us. We appreciate you so much. Appreciate you guys.